Hello, everyone, and welcome to Naming the Purple Elephant YouTube channel. Happy February. As always, I am coming to you full of love and light. And before we get into today's topic, I want to say one thing. If you're not good with yourself, you cannot be good with others. And I want to stay right there for a minute because we throw that phase around like it's inspirational, but it's actually structural. If you are at war with yourself, you will create tension around you. If you don't trust yourself, you will struggle to trust others. If you're harsh with yourself, you will become harsh in your expectations of others. If you avoid your own discomfort, guess what's going to happen? You will avoid the necessary conversations that you need to have in life to propel and move you forward. If you need constant validation internally, you will quietly demand it externally. Being good with yourself doesn't mean you think that you're amazing every day. It means that you are aware of what moves you emotionally. It means you know what triggers you. It means you understand your fear patterns. And it means that you know how you respond when you feel threatened or dismissed or unseen or criticized or out of control. And here's the part that most people don't even realize. If you haven't examined those patterns internally, you will project them out. You will project them onto your partner. You will project them onto your friends. And if you're in leadership, you're going to project it onto your team because leadership magnifies what is unexamined. Power does not fix insecurity, it amplifies it. Authority, it does not erase fear, it exposes it. So when I say if you aren't good with yourself, you can't be good with others, I mean if you cannot regulate yourself internally, then you cannot create regulation around you. If you cannot sit with your own discomfort, you will try to control other people's behavior to calm yourself. And if you do not know your own wounds, you will bleed onto people who did not cut you. And this is what we're going to talk about today. Not just leadership strategy, not just management styles, but the internal blueprint that drives how you show up with others. And that blueprint was formed long before you even had a title. So, why are some leaders constantly micromanaging while others completely avoid conflict? Well, it's not about their degree and it's not about their business strategy. It's likely rooted in a blueprint formed before they were 5 years old. Your early attachment experiences, how you were soothed as a child, how you were corrected, how you were validated, how you were ignored, how you were criticized, how you were protected. All of those things build a relational operating system. And that operating system doesn't disappear when you become a CEO of an organization or an executive director or a president. It just gets promoted. So if you grew up in unpredictable environments, you may now be a person that over controls everything. If love or safety felt conditional, you may now be a person that chases performance to feel secure. And if conflict felt dangerous to you as a child, you may now avoid conflict at all costs, even when your organization is bleeding internally. And this is not about blame, it's about awareness because your attachment style dictates how you communicate with other people under stress, how you respond to feedback that other people give you, how you handle disagreements, how much autonomy you will allow, and whether people feel psychologically safe around you. And most leaders help and most people have never examined this, right? I once worked with a CEO who said, and I quote, I'm not controlling, I just care about excellence. Okay, but here's what excellence looks like in practice. He rewrote emails his team had already sent out. He corrected fonts in shared documents at midnight, and he asked for hourly updates on projects that he had already approved. And every time that I gently suggested this might be anxiety, not excellence, he would say, "No, I just don't like chaos." So I asked him, "What does chaos feel like to you?" There was silence. And then he said that he grew up in a house where nothing was predictable. The bills were unpaid, emotions were explosive, silence meant that something bad was coming. So now a typo feels like instability, a delayed response feels like danger, and a missed detail feels like a loss of control. That is not strategy, that is attachment. He wasn't managing his team, he was managing his childhood. And his team was exhausted because of it. So let's talk about workplace drama. Most team conflicts are not professional disagreements. They are reactive childhood relational anxieties. Write that down. When a team member misses a deadline and you feel this disproportionate rage that may not be about the deadline, it may be about your nervous system that equates unpredictability with danger. And so when someone challenges you or challenges your ideas, you feel personally attacked. And that might not be about competence. It just might be about early experiences where disagreement in your life meant rejection. So when leaders micromanage, it's often anxiety that's disguised as excellence. When leaders avoid conflict, it's often fear disguised as harmony. And this is how childhood patterns show up at work. The avoidant leader shuts down emotionally and becomes distant during tension. The anxious leader over explains, over functions, and needs constant reassurance. The controlling leader tightens their grip whenever they feel uncertain. And the people pleasing leader refuses to hold boundaries just to avoid being disliked. And these are not personality quirks, these are survival strategies that once kept you safe. But in leadership, unexamined survival strategies destabilizes teams. So let's flip it. I worked with another leader who prided herself on being calm. She would say, "I don't believe in confrontation." Well, translation, she believed in resentment. Her team had clear performance issues, missed deadlines, passive aggressive emails, tension everyone could feel, but she would not address it. Why? Well, I'll tell you why. Because in her childhood, conflict meant emotional withdrawal. If someone was upset, they disappeared. If someone disagreed, love felt threatened. So her nervous system equated confrontation with abandonment. So she avoided it. And guess what happened? The team did not feel safe because safety is not in silence. Safety is clarity. And avoidance creates confusion. Again, not strategy, attachment. So here is where it gets a little uncomfortable. Leaders often unconsciously project parental dynamics onto their teams. Some leaders expect loyalty the way that a parent expects obedience. Some leaders respond to disagreements the way a threatened parent might respond to defiance. And some leaders over identify with certain team members. The good child equals the high performer. The one, the high performer, the good child is the one who never challenges authority. And other team members trigger something in them. And maybe it's because they resemble a sibling dynamic, a past authority figure, a younger version of themselves. And when that happens, decisions stop being strategic, they become emotional. And you might think that you're disciplining performance, but what you're doing is that you are reacting to a wound. And you might think that you're protecting standards, but what you're really doing is you're really protecting your ego. And your team feels this immediately. They may not have language for it, but they feel the instability. So let me tell you about a leader who had a favorite employee. Every meeting, one team member could do no wrong, even when she underperformed. Meanwhile, another team member who was equally competent was constantly scrutinized. They were tone policed, they were work questioned, they always doubted their intent. So when I asked why, the leader said, well, it's because the other one just feels easier. Well, easier? That easy employee reminded him of his younger sibling, agreeable, validating, never challenging. The other employee was assertive, direct, asked questions, and she activated something inside of him. And instead of examining that activation, he just labeled her as difficult. And organizations are full of family reenactments: the golden child, the scapegoat, the peacemaker, the rebel. And leaders swear it's about performance, but it's not. It's about familiarity. And so have you ever noticed how certain situations create reactions in you that feel bigger than the moment? Feedback feels threatening, deadlines feel like personal attacks, questions feel like challenges to your authority. That's not incompetence, that's activation. When pressure hits your nervous system, what happens is your nervous system says, what is the best strategic response for me to have right now? And then it asks, am I safe? And if your early blueprint equated pressure with criticism or chaos or emotional withdrawal, your body will react accordingly. So you might end up snapping at your team, or you might withdraw and become really cold, or you can overcompensate and micromanage, or you can shut down decision making, or you might even lash out defensively, all before your rational brain catches up. That's the mechanism behind irrational reactions to team feedback or deadline pressures. It's not about the task, it's about the old imprint. So let's talk a little bit about feedback. I once facilitated an executive session where a board member offered a constructive critique. It was measured, it was professional, it was calm, and the CEO's reaction was immediate defensiveness. Their voice tightened, their posture stiffened, and their language just became very sharp. And later in private, he said to me, I don't really like being undermined. And I was like, undermined? You know, that word, when we unpack it, what surfaces? A childhood where mistakes were humiliated publicly. So feedback didn't feel developmental. What it did is it felt exposing. And so his body reacted, not to the board member, but to an old imprint. And when you don't examine your emotional blueprint, you assume that every challenge is disrespect. And that is how good leaders slowly start to lose good people. So here's the empowering part. Attachment patterns, they are powerful, but they're not destiny. Leadership maturity begins the moment that you can pause and ask, is this reaction about the present or is it about the past? Am I responding or am I reacting? The most stable leaders are the most strategic. They are the most self aware. They have done the inner work to separate childhood survival from adult leadership. They regulate before they react. They repair when they misstep. They create safety because they're not constantly scanning for threat. And when leaders regulate themselves, teams stabilize. And when leaders are emotionally safe, performance increases. And when leaders stop projecting their past, the culture transforms. So here's the good news. I've also worked with secure leaders. And secure leaders, they're not perfect. But when tension rises, they pause. When feedback comes, they breathe before responding. And when something feels big, they ask themselves quietly, why is this landing so hard? That question alone separates reactive leadership from regulated leadership. Secure leaders do not eliminate pressure, they metabolize it. And because they regulate themselves, the room is able to relax. And when the room relaxes, performance improves, not because people are afraid, but because people feel steady. So, yes, this is the story. This is the credibility. This is the I'm not preaching from a pedestal. I've bled on the floor too moment. So, I'm going to be honest and I'm going to be very specific and I'm going to be slightly self roasting, but fully powerful. All right. So let me tell you my story. Um, I got hired as a director of a program at the very ripe young age of my very early 20s. I had no leadership experience, no emotional regulation training, and no real understanding of myself. But I did have ambition and I had confidence and I had a title. So what do you think happened? I messed that up and I messed that up bad. And not a small learning curve bad. I mean, I destabilized my entire team bad. So here's how I did it. I micromanaged because I didn't trust myself. I overcorrected staff publicly because I thought authority meant control. I avoided hard conversations until they exploded. I personalized everything. If someone disagreed with me, I took it as disrespect. If someone questioned my decisions, I felt exposed. And if someone didn't immediately validate me, I spiraled internally. And because I was insecure, I tried to lead from intensity. And I thought that leadership meant dominance. And I thought that leadership meant having the final word. And I thought that it meant being the smartest person in the room. What it actually meant was I was terrified of being found out, terrified that someone would realize that I didn't fully know what I was doing, terrified that my age would be used against me, and I was terrified that I wasn't ready. So I compensated. I overfunctioned. I overtalked. I overcontrolled, and the team felt it. Morale dipped, tensions rose, people got extremely quiet around me. And when people get quiet around you as a leader, that is not respect, that is fear. And eventually the role ended. Um, and I had to sit with myself. No title, no ego shield, just me. And here's the gift that I found in that failure. It was humiliating, but it forced me to look at myself, not my strategy, not my resume. I had to look at myself. Why was I so reactive? Why did disagreements feel threatening? Why did I need to prove myself in every room? Why couldn't I regulate when challenged? That period broke something in me, but it also built something because I realized that I wasn't leading, I was defending. I wasn't confident, I was activated, and I made a decision. Before I ever took another director role, I was going to understand my leadership blueprint, my triggers, my attachment styles, my insecurity patterns, and I was going to learn how to sit in discomfort without lashing out or tightening control. And when I took my next director's role, I was a completely different leader. Same intelligence, same drive, but I was regulated. And so when staff would push back, I would listen. I created psychologically safe places for my employees to show up as themselves. And when conflict or tension happened, I would pause. And when I didn't know something, I would be honest with my team and I would say, I don't know. I got to get back to you on it. I didn't need to dominate the room anymore. And because I was steady, my team was steady. So we hit our goals and we stabilized culture and we built trust, and I rocked in that role. Not because I suddenly became smarter, but because I became more self aware. And that is the difference. You can't lead others well if you haven't examined yourself. And I learned that the hard way, and I'm so grateful for it. So, if you aren't good with yourself, you really cannot be good with others. And leadership is not about control. It is about regulation. It's not about dominance. It is about awareness. And if you've recognized yourself in any part of this video, this is not shame. This is just growth knocking at your door. And growth is a beautiful thing. This is the work. This is the work that you need to do, because understanding that blueprint that shaped you and then choosing to lead from consciousness instead of conditioning, this is what you need to do. This is what I help teams with. This is what I help organizations with. So if this resonated, comment below. What pattern did you recognize in yourself? And if you want to go deeper into coding leadership and people systems, please make sure that you subscribe, because we're not just talking about business here. I also talk about love. I also talk about friendships. I also talk about family. We get real over here. We're talking about the human nervous system, and that applies to everything in our lives. So thank you, and I will see you in the next one.